Hello and welcome to another episode of the Architecture Foundation's Book Week 2023. Today we are joined by Mohsen Mostafavi, who will be discussing the book Sharing Tokyo, Artifice and the Social World. And I will pass it over to you now to talk through the book.
Thank you, Amy. It's really wonderful to have this opportunity provided by the Architecture Foundation to talk briefly about this book, Sharing Tokyo, Artifice and the Social World. This book is a collaboration between a Japanese colleague of mine, Kayoko Ota, who is based in Tokyo, and I'm based in Cambridge in the United States, and we've been able to collaborate on this project, which is part of a larger research initiative that I'm leading at Harvard to study the future of Japanese urbanization. This book, Sharing Tokyo, essentially grows out of a review, a kind of critical reflection of what's happening currently in Japan, where there are a lot of large-scale private developments that are occurring. And in a way, if this tendency is to continue, it really reduces the possibility of a greater number of the population really sharing in the city in the Lefebvrean sense of the right to the cities. So part of this book is really considering alternative possibilities for the future and how the city might be shared in a way that is slightly prohibited by the idea of privatized large-scale development. This is the title of the book. We are working actually also with a Japanese graphic designer who's based in LA, who has been working with us on a lot of our projects, the company's folder. And as you can see from the cover, it's also part of a larger project under the title of Japan Story, where I teach courses and option studios, design studios, in addition to the collaboration that I have with Kayoko and others, including some graduates of the program at Harvard who have been working on this project, which has also been generously subsidized by the Takanaka construction company in Japan. Looking at the content of the book, essentially the book is divided into 3 sections. There is a beginning or a part which is to do with the question of post-growth city. Japan, like many other societies, is basically going through a process of degrowth, a reduction in the population. And the beginning of the book addresses the concept of the post-growth condition. Then we introduce the current condition of large-scale developments and their consequences in some way. This is followed by a study of the concept of neighborhoods, which are really smaller scale, much more intimate developments. And the book concludes, if you like, with the 4th section, which is architecture as urbanism, where we seek to find new possibilities, new directions for the future of the city, including some of the work that I've also been doing at Harvard with my own students. The city of Tokyo is I'm sure many people know, it's a fantastically exciting city, and in order to also introduce the reader to the city, those people who haven't been there, we've been working with a fabulous photographer, Kenta Asagawa, to document the city in some way. So the book begins with a series of what I think are very strong images of Tokyo, but not from a sort of touristic perspective, but from the perspective of a sort of point of view that's not the everyday point of view. Here you see a typical area of Tokyo with 10, 12-story developments, a highway in the background, and you very quickly understand this sense of the density, in a way, of the city, and also the way in which the interiors of many of the blocks have these hidden elements like courtyards or a swimming pool or landscapes. And as you see in this image, also the differences in the scale of everyday buildings. A lot of the buildings in Tokyo are quite narrow, maybe 1 room wide and 2 rooms deep. So in the foreground, you see really this idea of scalar differentiation on the street front, and you get a sense of the character of the city, but also this juxtaposition with nature, with play spaces on the interior of the block. And I think these photographs of Kenta Asagawa provide a very interesting introduction in some ways to a city different than the kind of typical images, including this group of workers during a break, and the juxtaposition with the vending machines and that kind of environment or that atmosphere, which is very typically Japanese. I think in the book we're also seeking a kind of discovery of the city and projects that are helping to recover, for example, certain aspects of the city that have been hidden. For example, during the 1960s, with the development of the Olympics, many of Tokyo's waterways, canals, rivers got covered by highways, or they just got covered over. And as you see in the case of this particular project, which is called Shibuya Stream, part of the project, an architectural project, has also been the urban recovery of public space in terms of also uncovering the waterways as part of this. I'll return to this topic later on. Kenta Asagawa has also been very clear in documenting the smaller scale public spaces, the alleyways. These kinds of alleyways are very typical of a Tokyo neighborhood, and the way you see the small potted plant in the middle of the photograph, or the bicycle or other greens, even along the alleyway, how this nature is brought into the life of the city. If we look at the statistics, even though Japan has a lot of forests, cities like Tokyo have a lot fewer public parks than New York or London, but they still have a very strong sense of how they use nature, and how nature is something that is very much part of this kind of everyday life of the city. So these photographs, as I said, give you a sense of the different qualities and characteristics, both large-scale projects, but also smaller-scale neighborhoods, by way of introducing the reader to a kind of character and quality of Tokyo. We use this book to also demonstrate, to show some of our design research initiatives at Harvard, including the production of certain the data visualization elements or graphics that point out, for example, how by 2050, nearly 40% of the population of Tokyo will be over 65, and the fact that Japan is really aging very quickly, and that together with a very low birth rate is producing a lot of kind of challenges for the future of the city. The other thing is really the increase in the number of people who are living alone, of singles, in a way that's also typical of many European countries, but Japan's rate is also increasing quite dramatically. You see on the left-hand side at the bottom, Pakistan is really one of the very few places where there is almost no space for people to live alone, whereas in the Western world, there is this increasing number of people who are living alone. And this kind of statistic goes hand in hand with information about how the city itself is reducing its characteristics and quality of publicness by noticing the dramatic increase in the number of privately owned public spaces that have soared in recent decades. So these kinds of statistics allow us and urge us in some ways to think about alternative strategies that people, singles, families, can come together and can really share the city, in the sense that how can the city provide the basis for alternative forms of equity, of equality, of inclusiveness, in some ways that is allowed by private developments, which tend to be quite high-end and not really affordable by the vast majority of the people. So we deal with this question of how to share Tokyo by reviewing the history of neoliberal policies and how the country has, especially in the last 20 or 30 years, moved much more towards an American, if you like, model of capitalist development. Of course, the state in the Japanese context is always somehow involved in ways that are quite maybe different than we would encounter. But nevertheless, this question of the consequences of neoliberal policies are part of this conundrum of the challenges that face metropolitan areas. In order to do that, I think we also try to consider sometimes the history of people trying to understand the question of planning and urban development. And one of the sections that I really like in the book is an essay on the work of Yoshizaka, who was a Japanese architect and urbanist who also worked with Le Corbusier. But he did a lot of very inventive drawings, essentially also looking at a redistributive model of urbanization, where the concentration was not only in Tokyo, but this question of how to invent also a methodology or ways of thinking differently is part of the interest of the book. Here you see a photograph, an image of a big project that is called Tokyo Midtown. It's in the Roppongi area of Tokyo. And as opposed to the early photographs that I showed you, where the city is made up of these individual buildings, here we're looking at a kind of large part of the city where there are a cluster of buildings that have been made by one developer. And there are much larger versions of this phenomenon, but essentially you're seeing kind of urban fragments developing through private capital, through private investment. In order to understand this, we also did or do a lot of drawings that are in many ways deconstructing the history of Tokyo's urban morphology. Here you see one company, which is called the Mori company. It's a developer, And you'll see that how they are focused in one area and how they have been doing, for example, here they started with a project called Arc Hills, but they are also responsible for Roppongi Hills, for Toranomon Hills, and they basically concentrate and focus in one part of the city. And this tends to be a trend in Tokyo, where a small group of very large-scale developers basically have forms of concentration in one area. And we try to also understand what is the logic of their development, the way in which they basically grow from one project to the next, and the relationships between them. Here we are analyzing and studying both the role of private development, but also one exceptional area, which is to the west of Tokyo that you see here, prior to many of these developments, which was the Shinjuku area that grew out of a kind of water plant that was in that area. And it's the precursor to these sorts of large-scale developments done by private developers. And to the right, you see an example of the increasing role of railway companies in making urban projects and urban developments. So not only are there traditional developers who are doing very large-scale developments, but also now railway companies, because of the land that they have and the railway tracks, they're also becoming essentially very large-scale developers, bringing retail and commercial and residential and office buildings, adding to their portfolio of railway companies. These types of developments essentially are juxtaposed with the idea of neighborhoods. One area that is particularly interesting is called Yanasen. In a way, it's a made-up neighborhood, made up in the sense that a group of people who lived in 3 adjoining neighborhoods decided to, in a way, rebrand these 3 neighborhoods together as one area through the creation of a magazine that in many ways became the point of identity of this neighborhood, and was made available in shops and in stores. So this also created a form of tourism, a kind of attraction to this partially fictionalized new neighborhood. But this tension between large scale and, in a way, the intimacy and the nostalgia of the neighborhood concept is something that is very important to take into consideration. Here you see, for example, a community or a small bathhouse, the depiction of that on the right-hand page of the book. And you see something of the character of the traditional small-scale neighborhoods. But of course, the very concept of, or the very word neighborhood, which goes hand in hand with the idea of neighborliness, doesn't really exist in the Japanese context. So in the book, we also invited a scholar to really write about the history of the word neighborhood and how the Japanese version of this idea of a kind of locality is different than the Western word neighborhood. But nevertheless, many of these characteristics are there in terms of the small areas that exist, these neighborhoods that exist around Tokyo. One interesting phenomenon is how some emergent practices, one being a very interesting practice called schemata, which is run by the architect Joe Nagasaka, are intervening both in small neighborhoods in Tokyo, but also in regional cities by creating more intimate, small-scale, essentially public architecture, buildings that open up to the street, buildings that combine functions. For example, here on top, you can see a combination of a small bathhouse and a bar, a cafe. At the bottom, you see the offices of Joe Nagasaka and Schemata, which can also be opened up to become, in a way, an event space in their locality. And I think this idea of buildings having a kind of multiplicity of functions and relating to the community is one of the ways in which the question of sharing has been addressed. But there are also examples of larger scale projects. This is a project by one of the railway companies called Shibuya Stream and designed by a company, by an architectural practice called Silicon, which is really trying to use especially the lower levels of the building as new forms of public space, connecting the building to the city. Here you see the large-scale staircase connected to the canal, the way that there can be public performances that are part and parcel of these kinds of initiatives. But we end the book really with a series of examples like Joe Nagasaka, but also, for example, the work of Erika Nakagawa, where the question of small scale or alternative ways of lifestyle or living are explored in their projects to create new forms of sharing that are inserted, like you saw in the early photographs, as utilizing these narrow lots in the city. But we end the book with some of the explorations of our own research, where instead of only using one or two buildings, we use the structure of the academic teaching platform, because we have 12 graduate students, to essentially ask people to produce 2 or more projects, so that we are, in a way, developing a kind of critical approach towards large-scale urban design by introducing 20 or 30 projects into a relatively small area. Here, you see the examples of a couple of projects by one of the graduates, Andrea Adam, who is, for example, using urban agriculture, but also the idea of using air rights to bring together a series of projects that are both dealing with questions of habitation, but also of work, new forms of labor, new forms of production, and sectionally, in terms of the city, also exploring in some ways not only the single space, but also really the idea that you can use the air rights in this kind of context to rethink the social life and the social structure of the city. And finally, this model gives you maybe a better sense of how this question of a multiplicity of projects and the intensity that they bring can produce not only new forms of urban development, but new ideas in terms of how the city can provide a different sense of spatial and social equity and interaction between its citizens. So this concludes the visual part of the book. And we also have, I think, an interesting conversation with the the scholar Homi K. Baba on the relationship between public space and public sphere to also develop a more theoretical, if you like, framework for some of these discussions in terms of how the question of public space and the public sphere has been thought about and how it might be utilized for us as architects and urbanists as we begin to think about alternative strategies, for example, about the future of housing beyond the standard conventions of what an apartment building is, or what living in the city is, or how we can share the city with others. So I very much hope that you will consider this book and you will enjoy reading it, and we look forward to receiving your feedback. Thank you.